Yep.
All yours, mate.
Ow.
So here we have qualifying for 600cc, so that's your modern Supersport bikes, in round one of the St George Sprint Series here at Sydney Motorsport Park, or better known as Eastern Creek in Sydney, Australia. As you can see, we're still dealing with the effects of some of the torrential rain that Australia and the East Coast has been getting quite a lot of, although there is blue sky coming in, we'll keep an eye on that. So in Gen 1, the carbureted SV650, going out tentatively just to see what the track's like because it had been absolutely soaking. It wasn't too bad a session. I had fairly fresh wets on. Hadn't ridden in a while, hadn't ridden since. I hadn't ridden either of these bikes realistically since the last race meeting. I've done 2 sessions on this one at the South Circuit day with Sydney riders. But this is a very different animal when you're riding it in sloppy wet conditions like this. As you can see, we're up against the 600s, so there was a massive top speed difference, especially in the wet. You can see the track conditions are pretty treacherous. We have those patches from the V8 supercars and some cracks and splits opening up because of the constant change in weather and all of the water sitting at the top of the tablelands. So, got to keep an eye on that. You'll also hear on the straight here, the bike doesn't sound like it's running properly. Here it start to cut a little bit, and we actually discovered that was an issue with the front spark plug being inundated with water. As you can see, it's soaking wet. There's Noel, one of the Irish lads, goes past us on his beautiful ASBK R6. So there's a couple of rivers on the track, but you can also see how the track conditions are changing pretty rapidly with all that sunshine. So this is the end of qualifying where we can do our practice start. You hear me rev it up here, trying to replicate that issue that I was having with it not revving all the way to redline. It was at about here that I remembered that SVs tend to have the issue of flooding the front spark plug if you don't have the Gen 2 and onwards, a little rubber flap hanging off the front radiator. So this is race 1, so we've qualified already. We're going to go out in race 1 now. I missed qualifying for Formula St George because of this the bike issue with this bike, so I hadn't seen the track condition change. You can see it's drying out quite a lot. There's a couple of little rivers here and there. And I'm on full wets. Most of the grid are on full wets. Now this was a new set of wets, and as everything is in life these days, they're pretty expensive. And I had made the call with the team that if I decided that it was going to be too dry for the wets, and I didn't want to destroy the wets, that I would make the decision to pull into the pits and attempt to do my best imitation of Jack Miller and go out in the semi-dodgy conditions on the slick shot bike on Gen 3. So you'll see the team, they've got Gen 3 off the warmers, off the stands, ready for me to pull in if I decided to do so. I'm going to have a nice smooth transition across here. The bike does sound good. So I had to start from pit lane, so I had to wait for all the bikes to come past. It's actually the most aggressive start I have of the whole weekend. Shooting out of pit lane, which is a bit dicey at the best of times. I managed to send it. You can see even on slicks, those damp patches, I knew that the track was pretty much dry enough for me to start pushing almost straight away. Got to take it a little bit tentatively initially, especially this first section, turn 2 and 3. The resurfacing kind of made it look pretty wet, but there was a lot of grip in it. You can see I've already started making manoeuvres by turn 4. there are still some rivers around, and they do tend to catch me out here and there throughout the race as I start to push. You can see there's big shiny patches through here, and some of the cracks there, something we really have to be very careful with throughout the day as they seep water. See the chap in front of an R6 just not getting the drive down. I was actually able to slipstream in fairly well. This may have been where I got my new SV top speed of 221 k's an hour. I wouldn't be surprised if it was this lap, considering he would have been punching a pretty sizable hole in the air. We are running the bike with a few modifications now. We've got a bigger airbox, new fairings, everything repaired after the crash in the Summer Nights series. The last race meeting that we did. Again, here you can see being on slicks compared to guys on wets, I had the confidence to just be able to put the bike where I needed it to. Now you can still see that a Daytona 675 is always going to trump me off the corner, even when they're riding on wets on the dry. Up over the hills, they usually tend to blast me, but as I'm on my slicks, in these conditions, I'm able to hold a bit more corner speed, so half the time I'm actually able to put a bit of gap into people off the corner. It's always interesting trying to ride in conditions like this because the track does tend to change lap to lap, depending on where riders are positioning themselves, where they're running across. See here, I rode straight out into the wet patch because I was on my normal dry line. And I hit that wet patch with slicks on. Thankfully it didn't spin up on me. Here you can see me having to run a really tight line across that wet patch there. There's patches on entry and on exit, these little rivers. Ultimately, the one on entry ended up catching me out. And I had a crash in another race. You'll be able to see that crash in our last video. If you want to go see that, head over to the channel, and while you're there, give the channel a like and subscribe for us, hit that bell so that you can see our pretty cool upcoming content. Again, even with wets on, the 600s are able to put the power to the ground and just disappear from us. But then with my confidence in the bike, the setup that we went back to from previous races in 2021, and then being on slicks, able to just have the confidence to send it. You can see here this is getting towards the last third of the race, and everyone that was on wets is just destroying the wets. You can see chunks of rubber flying off Romeo's tyre there hitting on my screen. Again, you see the narrow line, super narrow line we have to run on entry there. Exit's not as bad. On entry, on the brakes, downhill, got to be very careful. Turn 1 with that damp was giving some people issues. Again, on slicks, it got a little bit floaty, is probably the best way I would describe it, but I was able to make it work. See there, absolutely sending it past James on his Daytona. He was on wets. And I think he pulled in after that pass that I made on him purely because he realised that his wets were destroyed and he was just probably going to crash. So he made the smart call, I'm pretty sure, and pulled in little bits. And here we've jumped across to the last lap of the race. This is our City West Riders teammate Simone, who is R6. Again, normally a rider that I'd have to chase pretty hard to pass, but he was full wets and he absolutely destroyed his set of Pirellis. They were good for nothing but throwing out. This is jumping to race 2 on Saturday. Now, this is post my crash. You can see we're in position 13, so I started from pit lane in the last race, a group of 25 odd riders. I was able to get down to 13th place, so that's where we've started this race from. You can see Rob next to us there, one on the Irish lads, with James Graham in front of us on his beautiful CBR 600RR. Get the best of starts on this one. There goes Simono wheeling past me. Yeah, everyone's on slicks this time. You see me start making a bit of a hustle here. Like I said, we've just crashed in the Formula St George race, which was about 45 minutes before this. Semi-frantically repaired the bike, had to mess around with fixing the handlebar, changing out a rear set, doing some repairs to the fairings and engine crash protection just to make sure it's okay, get it re-scrutineered, get all my gear re-scrutineered, and then head out into this race in almost dry conditions. There was still some wet patches around that we had to be careful of, but I can tell you I was actually riding real cranky. I was very angry with myself, and I made a decision to just push real hard and take no prisoners sort of thing, which resulted in pretty good lap times. We got down to almost PB pace again in the mid to low 1 minute 42s, even with having to deal with some of this still. So crossing that there, that's not my normal line. Takes a lot of speed away from me. On exit it wasn't too bad in this race. But that entry just takes away 5 or 6 k's an hour on mid-corner speed, which takes away 10 k's an hour on this back straight. And then these patches here, it made it difficult to make up time where I normally would. But again, 1 minute 42s, you can't be upset with that. That's very good. That's race-winning pace for Formula St George. Lap record pace for Formula St George sort of stuff. So I was able to just plod along. We've kind of found a bit of empty air until Roscoe here works for RB Racing, Harley's excellent workshop. And that's a beautifully prepared R6. He had to start from the back of the grid because he had a technical issue in the first race. And I believe this is his first round racing that R6, having stepped up from a Honda 400 in Formula St George. So good to see him getting the grips of the bike, riding it pretty damn fast considering. We're both carrying about the same corner speed. We both opened the taps at about the same time and just watched the 600 just disappear away from us. There's Baker, a long-time friend of ours. He's one of the first people I ever raced way back in the Race Your Mates days with FX RRC at Wakefield Park. When I was racing my SV 650 road bike, headlights and all, in the beginners class. Racing against Baker and a guy on an RSV4 as well. We managed to podium twice that day, I think it was. And then after the second or third race, whatever it was, having crossed the line, got a bit carried away trying to give Baker a fist bump or two, and had a bit of a crash which resulted in me having 12 hours of memory loss and not waking up until about 11 o'clock that night in Golden Base Hospital. So you see us here, pull in, and I go to give Baker a much slower, more sedate and careful fist bump. So this is race 4. You might notice we've skipped race 3. Unfortunately, we were racing the morning with Gen 1 on wets, and the camera decided to separate from the bike, and the tether snapped as well. So we lost that race. This is the last race of the video because race 5 we had a technical issue with the recording. So this is the last race that we have on record for the weekend. So this is the second race of Sunday in 600. I started 17th, even though in race 3 I still finished quite a lot higher. We were running the wet bike and I forgot to change over the transponder. So there was a bit of an issue with timing me, figuring out where I was, so they put me back a lap, and I just typed in P17, which isn't too bad. Isn't the worst thing in the grand scheme of things. Still out racing in 600, racing with my friends, and getting reacquainted with Gen 3 and the settings that we had put into it. You can see here myself getting back comfortable pretty quickly. Oh, there's Ryan selling. So Ryan had a crash in the previous race, had a big high side, so he had to start from the back of the grid. Ryan's an ASPK level rider. I raced with him in Formula Extreme when we were racing at the front there, so absolute gun. You can see there's a wet patch there on the exit of 5. There's actually a wet patch or a wet stream somewhere in the middle of 6 here. You just saw it there. Which was causing me a few issues throughout this race, especially getting on the gas. I couldn't get on the throttle quite as early as I normally would, so sacrificing a couple of k's an hour up the hill, according to my data logger. You can see here, on Sunday the rivers are gone. That caused me a crash on Saturday, but we have 2 additional rivers here which were quite more dangerous. This one here on entry, right there, along with these patches and not much runoff on the outside, meant that we were all running pretty subdued, careful lines into that last corner, or that last flip-flop. Normally, if you've seen our other videos on the channel, again, go have a look at them and like and subscribe if you can. You'll see I make quite a few manoeuvres into that flip-flop, just because I have the confidence to carry that corner speed. But with their damp entry, the river across the track, and then the succession of patches, I just not risking it. I've already crashed once this weekend, and again, we're racing to have fun, so there's no point throwing it up the inside of someone and taking the pair of us out, or taking myself out. See James there in front of me on his Honda. Ended up chasing this group for a while. Again, our corner speed, we're just able to absolutely pile it on behind people. There you really saw the wet patch on the exit of that corner there. Big dark stripe. Tight line here to avoid that kind of shiny patch out there that was real slippery in the middle of turn 9. James Booth there, performing a pretty impressive save after messing up on the gear change, going down too many gears by the looks of things. See again, that water is spraying up off that corner, so there's standing water just as you're hard braking, downshifting 2 gears to go from right to left. Still 3rd gear, 140 k's an hour-ish. Around about 120. There's James Booth coming past me again, power of the 675, just screwing past me. I still had a pretty good top speed there. You heard me straight into the rev limiter as soon as I changed it to 5th. See James, fairly spectacular riding style there, elbow down, pretty cool to watch. Bit of chaos going on with riders of varying skill and avoiding other riders, wet patches. There's a nice move there on James, on the flip-flop, running him out wide, exit 5. You can see there, I was actually blocked by the 3 riders in front because I couldn't carry my corner speed as I normally would. Same here, there's 3 of them in front of me. Tried to do the old outside-inside, but the guy saw me coming. We've done a lot of racing together, this little group that we've been in. that I'm in, sorry. James comes up the inside and then just kind of holds me out wide. Again, normally I would just, if that wet line wasn't there, I would just hold that line and dive around the outside of him, but absolutely no point in risking it. It's a big crash if you come off there. Terminal speed for us in that back straight in good conditions is 170 odd kilometres an hour. See the closing speed here, just the confidence I have back on the front end of the bike. Like I was saying before, this is kind of the group that I've been running around with in the last couple of rounds of 600, with the night racing especially. Everyone's chopping and changing, trying to get past each other. You can see James covers the inside here because he knows that's a favourite passing point of mine, and then covers the inside here at 5, which was very cheeky. There's no way my normal line would have worked. So his race craft is getting quite a lot better, which is great to see. It's always good to see people improving like that. Again, you can see there, because of that wet patch, I wasn't able to get into the gas as early as I normally would, meaning I didn't stand a chance of trying to catch him up again. Tried to make a move up the inside here, but again, James is learning pretty well. He saw me there and just continued to tip in, which is a fairly ruthless tactic, but something that I employ as well. James Booth and myself, you can see where we are getting held up by the guy going into the corners. That's fine, but for me, I don't have the speed to be able to make a pass. Here I was just able to get a pretty good drive off exit, and was just able to set it on the brakes down into turn 4. Again, super confident on the front end, having made the changes that we did, adjusting the geometry of the bike. You can see that guy was quite a ways in front. By the next lap, I was on his tail, the back end of his R6 with the nice fluoro wheels. Great pass there, kind of what I'm used to doing into turn 9. I've kind of gotten used to, at this point, the corner being dry. Still a little bit tentative because of the crashing there yesterday. And you can see I was getting held up just a little bit mid-corner there, and then the power of the R6, modern 600, I mean, the 600 is always going to walk away from this, but especially the modern ones, those 2016 plus R6s are good for anything between 115 and 125 horsepower, depending on dyno tune and all that kind of thing. Again, you see that confidence there to just send the move through and the flip-flop between 4 and 5. Run out wide on a normal line. Here is really evident. We're getting on the gas late and then hitting and sliding a bit, and me running out wide there. On the data, I was actually about 4 k's down faster over the top of the hill compared to the previous laps, just because of getting on the gas that bit earlier, even with the slide. Now I get a really good run off this corner, like I normally would. And I know that 600 somewhere behind me, so I'm pushing pretty hard going into here. And then you see I hit that water, carrying a bit of brake, bit of lead angle, big twitch, runs myself out wide. Lose a lot of time, gave myself a good fright, I'm not scared to admit. And makes it a little bit easier for L-mate on the 600 to make a pass before the checker flags. That's the end of the race just there. Now, in fairness, I don't think had I not had that moment that I would have kept him to the line, but it would have been a lot closer than it was. That moment was pretty big, definitely scared me. Yeah, that's the end of our first round of the sprint series for St George. This is, like I said, this is against the 600s, which interestingly enough, I managed to place first in A and B grade 600 riders. I'm a B grader. The likes of Ryan Sellen and a few others were there. Because of our bike swap on the slick tyres in the first race, and then our position in the wet races, afterwards, and some misfortune for other riders. We were able to actually score enough points to win A, B grade, so first place for the round, which is pretty funny considering we're on a 75 horsepower SV650. It was an awesome weekend, had a lot of fun, even with the crash. 600 was really good. Massive thanks to St George for putting on the event and all the marshals and volunteers coming out and assisting. Without them, the racing doesn't happen. Massive shout out to my crew, Andrew, Carl, Jess, David, and the SWR team as well. It was an awesome event.